Scholars Network. Okay, so here we go. Welcome to this online event of the Weber Scholars Network on Max Weber's concept of Ordnung. Weber Scholars Network aims at connecting scholars with a wide range of research interests related to Max and Marianne Weber, from Weber specialists to people that work in dialogue with Weber's work in some way. For more information, you can always check out the site of the network, weberscholars.net. Now, please allow me to introduce today's protagonists. Andrea Salvatore Cerfeda is going to be our main speaker. He is going to present his fascinating analysis on how Weber uses and intertwines the concepts of order and legitimacy. Andrea is a PhD candidate in political and social philosophy in the Universities of Turin and Florence. He is also interested in anthropology, theory of modernity, and institutional theory. And now a few words on Andreas Anter, who is going, Andreas Anter, who is going to be discussing with Andrea Cerfeda. Professor Dr. Andreas Anter teaches at the University of Erfurt, Faculty of Economics, Law and Social Sciences. His research interests include state theory and state practice, constitutional politics, political theory, and of course, Max Weber's work and placed within a contemporary context. It is perhaps needless to say that Professor Anter has written some of the most influential works on Max Weber's political sociology. I will just mention his book, Max Weber's Theorie des modernen Staates, as well as his work on Max Weber und die Staatsrechtslehre, which also brings forward the significance of Weber's legal background. So it is a great honor for us today to be discussing with Professor Anter. As for me, my name is Yannis Ktenas, and I will be your coordinator for this evening. I am a postdoctoral researcher at the Sociology Department of the University of Athens. My PhD was focused on Max Weber's intellectual relationship with the Greek-French philosopher Cornelius Castoriadis, and right now I'm working at the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna, trying to use Max Weber's concept of value polytheism to examine the polemics that arose during the COVID pandemic. This is how we're going to proceed. Andrea Salvatore Cerfeda is going to speak to us on his subject for about 35 minutes. Then Professor Anter will comment on what Andrea said for about 15 minutes. Andrea will then respond, and then we could open it up to our audience, who can participate either by raising virtually their hands or by writing question, comments, thoughts on the chat, and I will read them out loud. I would also like to ask you to switch off your microphones as when you're not speaking, so that the speakers we could hear them more clearly. And without further ado, I will hand it out to Andrea. So the floor is yours, dear Andrea.
Thank you. So firstly, I would like to express my gratitude to Edith Anke, Victor Strazieri, and all the organizers of this event for granting me the opportunity to present a section of my doctoral thesis, specifically a paragraph in a public forum for the very first time. Moreover, I'm deeply honored to have Professor Anter as my discussant, who is, as we know, a profound expert in the topic that I am going to discuss. This presence here is a great privilege for me. At this point, you will also understand my emotion in making this presentation in front of an esteemed scholar as Professor Anter, using a language that, while global, is not my mother tongue. Therefore, I ask for your understanding and patience with my English, which may not be as eloquent as that of Shakespeare. Nevertheless, I hope that my presentation can still be clear and effective. So the topic I have to deal with is Ordnung and Legitimität, order and legitimacy, a topic that is properly a thesis, because my aim today is to demonstrate that the theory of legitimacy that Weber develops at the end of his life is intimately intertwined with the concept of Ordnung. It is my belief that removing the concept of Ordnung from this theory would render it unintelligible. The use to attend is undeniably complex, primarily due to the central role that legitimacy plays in Weber's work. We are speaking about a crucial category. As evidence of this, Professor Anter wrote in one of his books on Max Weber that legitimacy is to be regarded as the Zwillingsschwester, twin sister of the modern state. Furthermore, scholars have extensively discussed the Weberian theory of legitimacy, often arguing its inner contradictory character. It is precisely this supposed contradictory character that interests me. My intention for this presentation is to argue in the opposite direction to the idea of the contradictory nature of this theory. At this point, I want to make one thing clear. What is at stake here is not an attempt to perform a systematizing operation, to overwrite the Weberian text in order to line up all the various pieces and make the whole thing coherent. I do not wish to deny that in Weberian theory of legitimacy, there are problems, discrepancies, unresolved notes. What I want to show, however, is that the theory of legitimacy that Weber elaborated at the end of his life has its own unity, which is rooted in the concept of order. In my talk, I will argue for the connection between order and legitimacy by analyzing Weberian texts. Lastly, I will suggest that it was political historical reasons led Weber to think about the relationship between legitimacy and order. So we said that our object would be the theory of legitimacy that Weber elaborated at the end of his life. This is an important detail. Which texts are we talking about? Then basically two texts. Soziologische Grundbegriffe, translated into English as Fundamental Sociological Concepts, and Die Typen der Herrschaft, translated into English as The Types of Domination or The Types of Rule. And we are interested in specific paragraph of these texts, paragraph 5, 6, 7 of Fundamental Sociological Concepts, and the first two paragraphs of The Types of Domination. These are all textual places where Weber directly addresses the problem of legitimacy and where, among other things, elaborates his famous typologies of legitimacy, including not only the one about legitimate power, but also two other typologies about the legitimate order. A clarification is necessary at the outset. When examining Weber's typologies of legitimacy in works such as Soziologische Grundbegriffe and Die Typen der Herrschaft, we are interested in a theoretical perspective that is particularly powerful in its consequences. I will anticipate this perspective right away, and then we will examine it further by looking at Weber's texts. The idea is there is no legitimacy without an order. The prestige of legitimacy presupposes the existence of an order. This idea, while seemingly trivial, is in fact a very powerful perspective that Weber seems to have fully developed only towards the end of his life. So I repeat just once again, there is no legitimacy without an order. It is evident that to comprehend the relationship between legitimacy and order, one must first understand Weber's definition of order. This task may require not just one meeting, but perhaps even a series of seminars. But since it is our ethical duty to spare this network such pain, I will try to summarize what Weber's concept of order entails. Weber frequently employs the concept of order even in his earliest methodological works. However, he only explicitly defined it in his text, Soziologische Grundbegriffe. The definition Weber provides here shows the complexity and multiformity of this concept. In paragraph 5 of Soziologische Grundbegriffe, Weber writes, "We will call the substantive meaning of a social relation an order only when action is oriented to definable maxims." Here there is another problem, that is to understand what a maxim is. In his essay on Stammler, Weber dedicated significant attention to exploring the concept of maxims. To summarize, we can say that the term maxim in Weber generally indicates a rule for how an actor should behave, which may be further classified as either instrumental, relating the pursuit of certain purpose, or binding in its own right. In the first case, Weber speaks of an instrumental maxim, Zweckmaxime. In the second, of a normative maxime, norm maxim. According to Weber, order corresponds to the content of meaning behind action that is guided by a set of maxims, which may be normative or instrumental. As such, custom, Sitte, self-interested kind of behavior, Interessenlage, convention, Convention, fashion, Mode, all represent distinct forms of order. Even law, Recht, is nothing more than a complex system of order. To define the order as a system of maxims that orient human action is to give this concept an extraordinary semantic breadth. Custom, market, convention, law are all systems of maxims that orient action. However, the multiformity of the concept of order is made even more evident when Weber states, again in paragraph 5 of Soziologische Grundbegriffe, that action, especially social action, and even more specifically a social relationship, can be oriented by an actor's conception of the existence of a legitimate order. The chance that this actually occurs will be called the validity of the relevant order. We are slowly getting to the point that is relevant to us, because Weber in this passage uses the notions of validity and legitimacy. Here, Weber identifies a specific form of order, which is legitimate order, and defines its validity in probabilistic terms, as the chance that a given order will effectively guide human action. So, let's take a breath. Weber defines the order as a system of maxims that guides human action, and validity of an order refers to the probability of this guidance actually taking place. The validity of an order is the probability of its empirical effectiveness. You can well understand that this is a somewhat unconventional definition, as the notion of validity is typically associated with loftier ideals than mere effectiveness. Nonetheless, it is worth noting that Weber offers another conception of validity in Soziologische Grundbegriffe, which is closely connected to the definition of legitimacy and could be seen as more significant. Again, in paragraph 5 of Soziologische Grundbegriffe, Weber states, "The validity of an order means more than mere regularity of the course taken by social action, conditioned by custom or by given interests. If moving companies routinely advertise their services when leases expire, then this regularity is dictated by their given interests. If a door-to-door salesman seeks out a specific group of customers on particular days of the month or of the week, then that is either a familiar custom or a product of his particular interests. But if an official routinely appears in his office at the same time each day, then that is not only the result of a familiar custom, nor only determined by his given interests, to which he can conform or not as he pleases. This happens, as a rule, generally because of the validity of an order as a commandment, infringement of which would not only bring disadvantage, but which would normally be aberrant to his sense of duty, a sentiment linked to the value rationality, but which can manifest itself in numerous ways. The definition of what constitutes a valid order extends beyond the mere equation of validity and effectiveness, as it also involves a normative dimension. Here, Weber posits that the validity of an order exceeds its mere empirical effectiveness, as well as any factual regularities. The representation of the validity of an order can certainly be associated with the production of regularity, as exemplified by the official who goes to the office daily and punctually. However, Weber emphasized that the regularity conditioned by a valid order is distinct from that which arises from custom or self-interest. In this regard, Weber speaks of a bond that has the force of a commandment, Gebot, an imperative that must not be ignored. What is at stake here is a bindingness that allows no counterplay and involves a call to one's sense of duty. In short, the validity of an order is no longer understood as mere effectiveness, but as the relation of the order in question to the dimension of value. Let's read another passage. Only then will an order be called valid if the orientation towards these maxims occurs, among other reasons, also because it is in some appreciable way regarded by the actor as in some way obligatory or exemplary for him. Naturally, in concrete cases, the orientation of action to an order involves a wide variety of motives, but the circumstances that, along with other sources of conformity, the order is also held by at least part of the actors to define a model or to be binding, naturally increases the probability that action will in fact conform to it, often to a very considerable degree. An order which is adhered to from motives of pure expediency is generally much less stable than one upheld on a purely customary basis through the fact that the corresponding behavior has become habitual. The latter is much the most common type of subjective attitude, but even this type of order is in turn much less stable than an order which enjoys the prestige of being considered binding, or, as it might be expressed, of legitimacy, the prestige of legitimacy. It is evident that the valid order in this context is not simply the effective order. Weber employs terms such as obligatory, verbindlich, or exemplary, vorbildlich, to describe the nuanced and intricate character of this notion of validity, which finds its ultimate and most coherent reference points in the emergence of a value. What is particularly interesting, however, is Weber's explicit reference to the category of legitimacy in the closing line of the passage. Legitimacy, Legitimität, reflects the prestige associated with an order considered exemplary or binding, and therefore it is fundamentally equivalent to the validity of an order. We are now at the point that is most relevant to our discussion, but let's first summarize what we have covered so far. Our aim is to comprehend Weber's definition of the concept of valid order. The difficulty arises because validity has two distinct meanings. On one hand, it refers to mere effectiveness, while on the other hand, it denotes adherence to values to varying degrees. Therefore, validity is like a Janus phase concept. The key point to grasp, however, is this. While equating validity with effectiveness is a residual element of Weber's earlier methodological works, the assertion that the validity of an order means more than the mere existence of a uniformity of social action determined by custom or self-interest, and instead it represents a manifestation of a value-based obligation, this solution represents a new conceptual solution. the innovative character of this conceptual perspective appears to be closely aligned with its theoretical significance, as it involves a category such as legitimacy to characterize the validity of an order. Furthermore, Weber's intent seems to be to establish a complete and comprehensive identification between these two semantic domains. In other words, Weber is not only defining what a valid order is, but also what legitimacy is. It seems that Weber is asserting that legitimacy necessitates the existence of a valid order, that is, an order considered obligatory or exemplary, an order related to the dimension of value. In short, Weber is unveiling the enigma of legitimacy, asserting that it is a prestige that results from the existence of an order that is valid. However, by validity, it does not mean mere effectiveness, but rather a relationship to value. Legitimacy is a prestige indicating the establishment of an order that embodies values. This idea, introduced by Weber in the 5th paragraph of Soziologische Grundbegriffe, is further developed in the 2 following paragraphs, where Weber elaborates 2 typologies of legitimacy. Nevertheless, the idea of the link between order and legitimacy is confirmed in the Typengesellschaft, particularly in the section where Weber deals with the problem of legitimacy, namely in the 1st paragraph of this text, but also in the 2nd paragraph, which contains the famous classification of the types of legitimate power. As mentioned in the outset of this presentation, several scholars have posited that there exists insurmountable theoretical contradiction between the 2 legitimacy typologies outlined in Soziologische Grundbegriffe and the one expounded in the Typengesellschaft. However, my position is quite the opposite. While there may be formal disparities between these typologies, all 3 converge in asserting that legitimacy is a form of prestige that must be properly referred to an order. Unfortunately, due to time limitation, we will not be able to delve into these typologies in great detail. Instead, I will provide a brief overview before handing over to Professor Anter. However, it might be useful to first consider what it means to associate legitimacy closely with the concept of order. What are the implications of this relationship? In essence, the main theoretical focus of my speech revolves around this question. To answer it, we must begin with Weber's general characterization of the concept of order. Weber's concept of order is best understood as a system of interconnected elements. An order is a totality, an organized whole made up of a range of maxims. As such, the legitimacy or validity of an order encompasses the entire order. The question then arises whether there can be alternative forms of legitimacy outside the context of an order. In both Soziologische Grundbegriffe and die Typengesellschaft, Weber's answer is a resounding no. Weber contends that any given command or action can only be considered legitimate within the framework of an order that is related to value. This means that without such a system of rules for action and its accompanying values, there can be no real legitimacy. To better understand this concept, let us consider a concrete example, my presentation here today. According to Weber, its legitimacy can only be evaluated properly when taking into the order for which it was created, the Weber Scholars Network. We need to refer to its statute and try to articulate what values shape this order if we want to determine whether my presentation is legitimate or not. So if the presentation, for example, is too abstract or contradicts certain claims made by this network, then its legitimacy can be questioned. However, this does not necessarily mean that the same presentation would be illegitimate always and in every case. It could be legitimate if transposed to a different order, like a university context. Thus, Weber's concept of legitimacy is always tied to a specific order. Legitimacy is the prestige conferred upon an order endowed with some measure of value, and Weber explored this idea in greater detail in the various typologies he elaborated in Fundamental Sociological Concepts and the Types of Power. Unfortunately, as I have already said, it is not possible to broadly examine all three typologies due to the extensive amount of information for each and the specific uses they present. Of the two typologies presented in Soziologische Grundbegriffe, let us quickly read only the first one, as the second follows closely along with this one. Weber writes, the legitimacy of an order can be guaranteed. First way, purely inwardly, innerly, either, and here we have three possibilities, purely affectively, by instinctive dedication, or second, value rationally, by belief in its absolute validity as the embodiment of ultimate obligatory values, or third case, through religion, by belief that salvation depends on inner adherence of the order. Second way, also by expectation linked to the specific external consequences in given interests, but also by expectation of a quite particular kind. Allora, while the connection between order and legitimacy is quite obvious, because here Weber is speaking about a legitimate order, what could be discussed here is whether the connection between legitimacy and value is actually reaffirmed. The answer, however, is affirmative. For the three forms of internal guarantee of the legitimacy of an order, there can be no doubt. Even though Wertrationalität is mentioned as a distinct type of guarantee, it is improbable that instinctive dedication or religious belief are completely unrelated to an axiological orientation, and therefore to the affirmation of any value. The problem, if anything, concerns the external guarantee of legitimacy, since in this case Weber speaks of interest. However, it is important to note that for Weber, even an instrumental rationality can sublimate into a value rationality. Moreover, it must be said that it is true that Weber says that legitimacy of an order can rest on expectation of external consequences, but as he promptly specifies, it is always a matter of expectation of a quite particular kind, a clarification, this, that seems all but superfluous, especially when referring to a subject such as the relationship between interest and legitimacy. In German, it sounds like this, durch Erwartungen von besonderer Art, where art, type, character, in the original text is even emphasized with the use of italics. In short, what Weber is saying is that it cannot be the interest as such, or the interest in a generic sense, that guarantees the legitimacy of an order, but the interest in a configuration of a certain type, as to reaffirm that legitimacy is something more than the mere regularity of social action and thus of the situation of interest. Thus, the link between legitimacy, value, and order is reaffirmed in this classification of the ways of guarantee the legitimacy of an order. Let us skip the subsequent typology in the following paragraph, as it is a reiteration of the previous one, and turn to the relevant text, Die Typen der Herrschaft. The main question is whether the idea that legitimacy corresponds to the existence of a valid order is contradicted in this text. Notably, there is a passage in this text that some scholars view as being in direct conflict with Weber's remarks about legitimacy in sociologische Grundbegriffe. But it is pertinent to note that both texts were written by Weber within the same time frame, which makes it unlikely that they are in explicit and irreconcilable contradiction. But let's read this passage. However, writes Weber, neither custom and practice, nor interests, nor the solidarity fostered by purely affectual or value rational motives could provide a reliable basis for Herrschaft. Normally, there is a further element, belief in legitimacy. Let us proceed in order. As we have observed, the notion that the belief in legitimacy transcends both custom and interest is a claim that Weber consistently develops and defends in Sociologische Grundbegriffe. The question that arises is how the belief in legitimacy is a further element beyond the influence of purely affectual or value rational motives, especially because both types of motives were identified by Weber as capable of creating a legitimate obligation in Sociologische Grundbegriffe. How precisely can the affirmation of this further element be justified if legitimacy is legitimate validity, namely validity understood as a relation to value? My idea is quite simple and looks at the intertwining of order and legitimacy that Weber reached between 1919 and 1920 with the composition of fundamental sociological concepts. If we consider that the composition of the types of power dates back of the same time frame, and the two texts are part of the same editorial projects and are linked by continuous cross-references to each other, also with regard to the theme of legitimacy, it is reasonable to think that the further element Weber refers in the types of power is related precisely to the concept of order. In this regard, it should be emphasized that in the first paragraph of the types of power, where this furtherness is affirmed, the semantic of legitimacy is not directly associated with order, but rather with Herrschaft, defined as the chance that specific commands will receive obedience from a defined group of individuals. The problem posed in this context is, in short, that of legitimate power, namely the problem of a power that claims a duty of obedience, since it can demand that each of its command become, for the one who receives it, a maxim endowed with legitimate validity. Weber's thesis is that this claim cannot exist without the representation of a legitimate order. Of course, in everyday life, the effectiveness of a command may depend on custom and material interest, on purely affective or value-rational motives that manifest themselves in a disjointed manner, without systematic unity. Nevertheless, the observance of a given command that does not necessarily indicate the existence of a legitimate power. The legitimacy of power is something further with respect to custom and instrumental rationality, but also with respect to a subordination that is activated and distinguished on the basis of the content of the command in question, even if it is also evaluated affectively or rationally with respect to value. The commands of a legitimate power must possess value regardless of their specific content. As in the presence of legitimate power, one cannot decide whether to obey this or that command. The legitimacy of power does not admit occasionalism. Therefore, it is clear that there can be no legitimacy without a systematic reality, without an order, without a complex structure that is invested with value in its totality, and thus also locally. Legitimate power requires the establishment of an order represented as a structure endowed with value. This idea is also reflected in the following paragraph of the types of power, namely the second one, although the scholars have often drawn on it to support the thesis of the contradictory character of Weberian legitimacy theory. Here we find the famous classification of the types of legitimate power. Let us read it briefly and then we conclude. Weber writes, there are three pure types of legitimate rule. The validity of their legitimacy can be secured primarily in a rational manner, a belief in the legality of statutory orders and the right of those appointed to exercise rule to give direction, legal rule, or second case, in a traditional manner, an everyday belief in the sanctity of long-established tradition and the legitimacy of those whose authority derives from these traditions, traditional rule, or finally, third case, in a charismatic manner, the exceptional sanctity or heroic qualities or exemplary character of a person and of the orders that this person claims, proclaims, or creates. Charismatic rule. Even in this classification, the notion of order is absolutely central. Weber in no ways contradicts what he had stated in Soziologische Grundbegriffe on the subject of legitimacy. After all, rational legality and tradition are two forms of order. The only doubts possibly relate to the third type of legitimate power, since charisma is a force that guarantees an unconstrained obedience to the person possessing this gift, and can therefore charisma be seen as an alternative to the constitution of a legitimate order. However, charisma cannot exist as a lasting source of power without being associated with the establishment of an order. Charismatic energy tends to dissipate fairly quickly in the absence of a legitimate order to support it. Moreover, and this is the key point, a charismatic leader is always given in a certain order that strongly conditions the chance of their mission's success. For instance, in China, according to Weber, the Taoist and Confucian orders have neutralized the possibility of charismatic prophecy. So even the concept of charisma cannot escape the necessity of a reality that is constituted by orders. Overall, even charisma must be associated with the constitution of a legitimate order to generate legitimate Herrschaft, legitimate power. In this sense, legitimacy is properly the existence of an order endowed with value. I did not cover the section on the reasons that led Weber to think about the connection between legitimacy and order in my presentation. However, if there is interest, I would be happy to revisit this topic later. For now, I would like to conclude my presentation and give the floor to Professor Anter. Thank you for your attention.
So thank you very much, dear Andrea. I'm sure there are a lot of thoughts in everybody's heads regarding what you said, but before handing it out to Professor Andreas Anter, I just want to say that Andreas' talk was a very good example of how people working with Weber, right? Because as I understand it, dear Andrea, you're not in your PhD, you're not focusing only on Weber, but Weber is a part of your work. So here we have a mixture of people who are Weber scholars, right, working on Weber, and people who are working with Weber, and this can create a beautiful frame for discussion. So now let us hear it from someone who has been working on and with Weber for quite a long time. Professor Andreas Anter, we are looking forward to hearing your comment on what Andrea Salvatore Cerfeda has just said.
Yeah, many thanks from my side too, Andrea, for your valuable paper. It seems to me that you have addressed a crucial issue in Weberian theory, namely the relationship between legitimacy and order. And furthermore, the question what order actually means for Weber. Order is a key concept in his work, in his basic sociological concepts, in the sociology of rule, in the sociology of law. But the random usage of the word is contradicted by the fact that it's nowhere defined anywhere in his writing. Not least, it is a crucial topic in general, since the question of order is one of the most fundamental questions in social science. I will come back to this point later. First, I'm coming to my first point. If I get you right, Andrea, your thesis is that there is no conceptual discontinuity in Weber between the older and the later concept of rulership and legitimacy, but only a shift in perspective. And at this point, one could object that this discontinuity already reveals in a complete exchange of the semantics of the terminology. In the early versions of the sociology of rulership or sociology of domination, we can observe a casual word usage. When Weber speaks of rulership, he actually means a phenomenon that is nothing else but power. When he, for example, describes rule in the older parts as a phenomenon of everything social, or when he describes rule as one of the most important elements of community action, then he means nothing else but power. It is power that is an omnipresent phenomenon of social life. The criteria of rulership, command on the one side and obedience on the other side, simply can't be omnipresent in the whole society, since the whole society then would be a military parade ground. And Weber doesn't believe that. My second remark, I think you are right in pointing out that Weber's concept of order doesn't refer to a one-dimensional object. It is really a complex thing. But the question is how complex it is. I think it is not only complex, it is a jumble, it is confusion of order. And in this regard, I would like to recommend an approach which Wilhelm Yannis, following Weber, has called unbefangen, which you can call open-minded, but I think it's very difficult to translate. I think it is right to criticize Weber unbefangen, of course, in Weberian terms. And I will pick out two examples of this jumble of order in Weber. The first is the relationship between order and legitimacy. In the basic sociological concepts, this relationship is mostly tautological. You mentioned it, order is almost always legitimate order. This is particularly evident in section 5 of the basic sociological concepts, where Weber talks about the validity of an order and points out that an order will be valid only if the action of those involved is oriented towards an idea of the existence of a legitimate order. At this point, order is always legitimate order. My second example is about the randomness of the word usage, of Weber's word usage. It reveals in the same section of the basic sociological concepts where Weber states that the content of a social relationship can be called an order if the conduct is oriented towards determinable maxims. That means an order can simply be a content. An order can simply be ein Sinngehalt, wie Weber sagt, as Weber says. But while order at this point is a mere idea, it appears in the further paragraphs in a very different guise. It is sometimes a convention, it is sometimes law, it is sometimes a social relationship, it is sometimes an Anstalt, and not least it is the state as the ultimate order which crowns, so to speak, the cascade of Weber's sociological concepts. This protean nature of order, or to say in our newspeak, the diversity of order, the fact that order in Weber can be anything and everything, is a real challenge for anyone trying to find out of this jumble of order. And you said already something about it, but I don't think anyone should be afraid of this jumble, since it could be valuable to turn this observation into a research-oriented perspective. The semantic variety in Weber is only an expression of the variety of meanings of order in the history of ideas, and this leads me to my third remark. The varieties of the meaning of order in the history of ideas. I think it would be useful to contextualize Weber's attempts, since they are not without precondition. Weber's reflections stand in a line of reflections that run through the entire history of ideas. This goes for philosophy, this goes for political science, and this goes particularly for sociology. One of its founders, Auguste Comte, called sociology as the science of order. The science of order. And this is no coincidence, for orders are constant social phenomena of every human life. As Claude Lévi-Strauss later perceived from an ethnological perspective, all cultural efforts of mankind turned out to be attempts to establish specific orders. All cultural efforts of mankind turned out to be attempts to establish specific orders. And up to now, the central question in sociology is, how is order possible? I would refer to Dennis Wrong, American sociologist. For him, the central question is this question of order, and he said this is truly the most fundamental question in social theory. But up to now, this question remains unanswered. If nowadays the talk is about order, it is always referred to a patterned, stable arrangement of things, as Gianfranco Poggi, the Italian sociologist, observed. I think this is true to nearly all contemporary studies on order. Order is always a patterned, stable arrangement of things. That means that order can mean anything or anything. So Weber's attempts are only representative, since the previous conceptual attempts in various disciplines are rather dissatisfying. This has been complained since decades. First of all, in philosophy, the prevailing opinion is in philosophy that order is a so-called ultimate term that cannot be explained further, and whose definition always remains inevitably circular. Maybe this goes for Weber too. In his writings, order is always constituted by action, And in turn, action is always constituted to order. It is always the same, the snake bites in its own tail. That's why Weber's attempt seemed circular to many observers, and it is rightly been perceived that Weber's answers of the question of order are tautological. They relate to order by referring to order. And this description may be a starting point for, I think, coming closer to an answer of the unsolved question of Weber's concept of order. And I'm sure you will do it in your study. And so I thank you for your audience, and floor is yours, Andrea.
Thank you very much, Professor Andreas Anter, for this thorough comment on what Andrea Salvatore Cerfeda has said. And I think before opening up our discussion to the participation of the audience, we can hear a few words from Andrea responding to what Professor Anter just said.
Perfect. No, Professor Anter has captured some very important, a lot of very important points, and I anticipate at the outset that I will clearly not be able to answer all the questions that Professor Anter has raised, but I agree with everything. The only thing perhaps I disagree with is the fact that the order for Weber is always legitimate. Because custom or interest for Weber, in my opinion, are not legitimate orders. But it's true, no? We are speaking about a very complex concept that has a multiformity nature and that is very, very broad. It is like, Professor Anter has said, a confusing concept because the order can mean in Weber everything. This is true, but there is an internal articulation, in my perspective, to this concept, and we can distinguish between custom, situation of interest, order endowed with value, Anstalt, and so on. And I want also to make a clarification that it's not my aim to hide this complexity, nor this confusionary nature of this concept that, in my opinion, is a force in order to study and to approach to it. But my idea is properly to show this complexity in my work, in my PhD thesis. One point that probably in this perspective I want to expose is that, for example, in Italy, the critical literature has frequently erroneously equated Weber's concept of order with political or legal order, in order to make an example. No? However, these approaches present several uses. Both legal order and political order are two specific instances of the broader concept of order. Because, as Professor Anter said, to define the order as a system of maxims that orient human action is to give this concept an extraordinary semantic breadth. This semantic breadth, for example, is evident in a text such as Zwischenbetrachtung, where Weber speaks of Ordnung and in particular of Lebensordnung, applying this concept, yes, to politics, but also to economy, science, erotics, aesthetics. So It is therefore not possible not to reduce order solely to the political order, which is essentially just the concept of Anstalt. I want to say another thing, and then I can give the floor to the discussion. What, in my opinion, and this Richard Schwedberg has correctly noted, what Weber refers to as an order is very similar to the modern concept of institution in the social sciences. An institution is a set of rules for action that has certain characteristics. No? A card game, for example, is an institution. Languages are institutions. In other words, the Weberian concept of order is similar to what we currently describe as an institution, and as a semantic breadth that extends beyond the political sphere. So for this reason also, no, the nexus between legitimacy and order cannot be confined into a monodimensional dimension, no? But is a broader, is a nexus that extends beyond a broader dimension. So I can give the floor to the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you, dear Andrea. And now I think we can open up the discussion. You could either raise your virtual hand through, there is this reaction button at the bottom of the screen, or you could also write it in the chat area, and we'll transfer it, pass it to Andrea. Yes, Victor Sazzeri has something to say. Victor?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. Just to break the ice, thank you. It was really enlightening, and I think really useful also to have this kind of recorded to refer back to. And thank you also, Professor Anter, for the comment. I have a few questions. It's the questions for Andrea, but also to the group. I wonder if order is the best translation, because maybe an aspect of the German original is lost in a way, because it's Ordnung, which has a kind of an active aspect to it, or at least that's how it sounds to me. I can the native German speakers will correct me. Not that we should change the translation in any way, but this aspect gets lost. And why is it important? Because I think when with Ordnung, this active aspect means there is the construction of something. There is the institution of something, like you said. And that's why it makes me think of order or of Ordnung as a form, right? As Weber's term to refer to forms of social life. I would think, to me, that's the concept I would associate it more than institution, which to me becomes very charged and is less, you can use it less broadly than form. And my question is more, so this is just some speculation here, and I want to hear what this collective has to say about it, is what function, why does a word like order appear in his thought so broadly? Why is it so central, right? And what I would say is that it allows Weber, who departs from individual action, from the meaning of individual action, to deal with collective phenomena without devolving into kind of an organicist, into organicist concepts, or into structuralism, which is where I think he would be different from Lévi-Strauss and his tradition, right? Weber is dealing with collective phenomena of a enormous variety, but he does not fall into, when he produces concepts to deal with these phenomena, into either organicism or kind of a functionalism. He's producing, so what I would say is the fact that order is so central to it is because it allows him, it's a conceptual form that allows him to mediate between like individual action and collective phenomena. And of course, and I like what the definition that it refers to stable patterns, arrangement of things. This is what I would associate Weber's concept of order. So this gives him enormous breadth, right? He can use it to understand a great variety of phenomena, and it allows him, even though, right, and that's why especially the more Weber fixated of us, what we like is this incredible logical coherence of his thought and of his conceptual construction, but his conceptual construction is very dynamic and fluid in a way. And it is an order, and the centrality of order is one of the things that allows him, because he can very easily show you how order is constituted and then dissolves again, and without order being fickle, order being able to let's say, to give form, or to be a very rigid form in certain instances, or a very strict ordering of human agency. But it also allows Weber, that's why it's one of those concepts that would that would prevent us from saying he's a methodological individualist, because that's precisely a sphere that he inhabits that makes him something beyond just an individualist from the methodological standpoint, and not a positivist or an organicist, to use all these words. So for instance, this separates him from all these kinds of more strictly methodological individualist theories, let's say from marginal utility theory or rational choice theory, where to explain collective behavior, you go to a very strict formalism that even becomes mathematical at some point, right? It becomes equations at some point. That's Weber's in an open polemic also with these kinds of thinkers in his time, with the marginal utility, with the neoclassical economics that's becoming quite popular in the spirit of his predecessors, but also in his days. And on the other hand, he's in open polemic with the positivism of Auguste Comte or any other kind of, and with a certain reading of Marxism. So that was it. So does this make any sense in terms of why it's there and why it's so central? And perhaps for Professor Anter, I think it would be interesting for us to hear how does Weber then produce a kind of hierarchy between these orders? Because you mentioned how the state is kind of the crowning order. What does he use then to produce a hierarchy, if precisely in his sociology or in his thought, the fact that all these orders can inhabit the same kind of thinking, that's also characteristic of him. But I would agree with you that the state comes in as the kind of the crowning one. So that's it. Thank you again very much, and I'll tell you later if it's valid for the Weber Scholars Network or not, at least in my opinion. But I'll leave that to the end. Thanks so much.
Okay, Andrea, yes, you can respond to that.
Yes, I can answer briefly. Allora, in Italian, we translate Ordnung as ordinamento. It's a better translation, and you grasp a very important point. I don't know if in English there is a better translation, but there is this problem. Then you are right. Ordnung is a concept that serves as a connection between individual action and collective phenomena. And in this regard, we can say something about the centrality of this concept. Why? this concept is so central in Weber. For many reasons. Now I tell you just a few. Allora, my presentation is focused on a formal level, no? That rather than an evolutionary historical level. However, this choice does not imply that order is synonymous only with stability and fixity. No? It is important to clarify that the concept of order does not aim to neutralize social change, and here there is the centrality. Weber intended to explore the condition of possibility for social change, adopting a concept like that of Ordnung. Let us take the relationship between charisma and order as an example. No? One might think that charisma and order are two opposites, that charisma stands for revolution and order for absolute stability. However, this is not true. There is a very strong relationship between order and charisma. Even though charisma may radically alter existing orders, it cannot manifest itself without specific conditions created by the orders themselves. So, this concept is central also to study social change. It is a theme, no? Very important. In this regard, also in regard to the topic of individual action and collective phenomena, we can say that the concept of order does not, can be an excellent antidote to certain contemporary ideologies, no? Such as the neoliberal one, to the narrative of the individual who is master of his destiny, who can do everything by himself, who is capable of shaping reality without limits, as if reality was empty and formless, unorganized matter. Ecco, to this, one can oppose the Weberian concept of order. The individual is always thrown into a reality that precedes him and that has a complex structure, an organization that sets limits, constraints, that orients human action. So the theme of order has also a critical capacity, no? Especially for current problems. I don't know if I have answered, but
yes, Victor, you mentioned a very interesting question, the question of the translation of Ordnung, and I agree to you. The English translation of Ordnung is problematic because in English, order means at the same time command. It is not only Ordnung, but also command. And in German, we have, like in other languages, an additional meaning. This is the meaning of ordering, the process of ordering something. And this is very important for Weber's understanding of order. Order, I mentioned it is a very complex and confusing concept. Because it has a very great variety of meanings, and the one there is one author who posed this question very prominently. It is Friedrich August von Hayek, and Hayek said, "I hate this word order because there's always too much command in it." And he went back to the old Greek, and he said in the old Greece, people have two words for order, namely cosmos and taxis. Cosmos is a given order, the order that is always there, the order that is a spontaneous order. And on the other side, there is there's taxis. This is the order of the soldiers on a parade ground, and he relates to Aristotle and other old Greek thinkers, and he said we must principally do the distinction between cosmos and taxis, and he accused Weber for understanding order, Ordnung, always as taxis. This is not correct. I think he's wrong in accusing Weber, because when we read Weber, we come across this this meaning of cosmos everywhere, because Weber always thinks that Ordnung is still there. Otherwise, we can't act. We have Andrea and me. We both have mentioned this. That there is for Weber it is self-evident that order is always there, and he doesn't question this fact. The second point you addressed is the question if there is a hierarchy of order, and you mentioned the word crowning, or the crown of this basic sociological concepts. Well, I wrote a book on Weber's theory of the modern state, and I would be the last to deny that the state is a very central concept for Weber. But I think we can't speak of a hierarchy of orders. It is a hierarchy when we read the basic sociological concepts, because it starts with action and goes over social relationships and Anstalt and Verband and so on to the state. But that doesn't mean that the state is above all. And there's only one point which is close to the crowning, that is the critique of Michel Foucault, that is that the state is a kind of total order, a kind of ordering all other orders. And that is in Weber too. For Weber, there is no order which can resist against the order of the state. And so one maybe say that there is a kind of crowning, but only if we read the sociological, the basic sociological concepts from the beginning to the end. One is not forced to do that, to read it from the beginning to the end, because the other orders have their own right. And this is this can be seen if we study, for example, Lévi-Strauss and other, and Simon Roberts and other ethnological theorists who dealt with stateless societies. And these research to stateless societies show that we can't speak of a crowning of order in this case. So my answer is ambivalent. You are right and wrong in at the same time, or maybe Weber is right or wrong at the same time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else who would like to pose a question or make a remark? Think out loud, perhaps. Okay, in order to continue breaking the ice, I would like to take advantage of my position and just express some thoughts on the very interesting, indeed, talk Andrea made, and of course the commentary of Andreas Anter. My first question would be, perhaps it is professional fixation, as Victor said, but since in my dissertation, the connection I tried to establish, intellectual connection I tried to establish between Castoriadis and Weber was through the concept of meaning. For both of them, meaning is a central element of the social world. And of course, that also connects in a way with what Professor Anders said about cosmos, because we have this idea of Sinnwelt in Weber too, like a meaningful cosmos. So, Andrea, I would like to ask you whether you think there is some sort of strong or weak connection between legitimacy and order and meaning, because I remember, I think Weber writes at some point that legitimization has to do with internal meaningful pillars of power, right? That we recognize that we have to follow a command, let's say, not because it's a fact of pure violence, but we recognize something there, and there are internal meaningful pillars for this recognition. And then my second point would be, so to wrap it up, the first one, the first question has to do with the connection between meaning and legitimization, right? And the second point would be that we could also focus on the other concept you used a lot, and I think you were right to do so, the concept of validity or Geltung, right? And I think it's very interesting that, and it's a happy coincidence that we also have Hans-Henrik Brun with us, because if I'm not mistaken, when Weber was writing, this concept of Geltung was related to another tradition, the Neo-Kantian tradition, right, where you have the idea that values or ideas do not exist, but they gelten oder nicht, right? So, and here you have a very interesting switch, I think, with Weber, who gives rather sociological, purely sociological or social definition of validity. Validity is effectiveness. Does it work or it doesn't work? It doesn't refer to a transcendental order or meaning. It can work, it can be a matter of violence, let's say, and still have validity if it works on a social level. So I was thinking that maybe this concept of validity in this sense of the word could be, we could handle it, we can see it as a spectrum, let's say, right? Because a lot, this idea that concepts are sort of spectrums is to be found in Weber, who always writes that there are fluid or liquid boundaries between, let's say, charismatic legitimacy and traditional legitimacy, and we can use these very clear ideal types of legitimacy, but in reality, which is also always chaotic and very fluid, you have liquid boundaries between the various transitions. So I was thinking that in case validity can be seen as a spectrum, at the one end you would have the effectiveness of an order, just because people are forced to do, physically forced to behave in a certain way, and at the other end of the spectrum you would have a complete legitimization, and in between, because at a certain point you mentioned that an order must be valid in its totality, Right, but I think we could have, you know, in between all sorts of different situations where people kind of actors, social actors, kind of recognize some parts of an order as legitimate and other parts not so much, but still okay. And just one, I think I made myself quite clear, I believe. I hope, I rather hope so. And the other thing in this line of thinking that, you know, you have this spectrum. Maybe because you referred something regarding customs before, maybe a society or a community that is governed through the rule of customs, let's say, we could say there from a certain point on, we could have a legitimization through tradition, through the eternal yesterday, as Weber used to put it. And that's it, just to, you know, fuel the discussion, which I hope will continue after this. Thank you very much again.
If you want, I can answer very briefly. Tradition, I think, is a sublimation, is the sublimation of custom. Regarding the nexus between meaning and order, you are right. The connection is there because the order is the content of meaning that guides human action. Let us say that for the problem of legitimacy, the question is whether this set of meanings is given the element of value. In regard to the question on the relationship between validity, Geltung, legitimacy, probably in this perspective, it may be good to revisit the connection between effectiveness and validity. As previously mentioned in Weber's work, the concept of validity, Geltung, is a Janus space concept. No? In sociologische Grundbegriffe, validity can represent either effectivity or the relationship to value, which can appear in various degrees. However, I want to make clear, however, these two meanings are not antithetical. It is important to recognize that value is a dimension of effectiveness, as orders that have value tend to be more effective for Weber. Value is not the opposite of effectiveness, but a specific dimension and one of its potential determinants. From this perspective, it may be useful to say that in defining validity as effectiveness, as you have correctly noted, Weber's intention was essentially to think of a sociological, empirical validity that was different from the dogmatic and formal validity that a science such as jurisprudence thinks of. In this way, but equating validity with value, Weber, I think, clarified a reflection that had been developing since his earliest methodological works. No? The fact is that value is not the opposite of effectiveness. And this fact is probably a key idea that can be useful in also addressing Weber's position on interest as a guarantee of legitimacy. But what I wanted to say is that equating validity with value is also a key to show the complexity of effectiveness. So effective orders can be custom, interest, and so on. So the two dimensions the dimension of effectiveness and the dimension of value are strictly connected to each other.
Yes, thank you very much. I really like this, the fact that you insist on the non-antithetical character of values and effectivity, and we could also rephrase Weber, who used to say that he was really interested on how ideas work or are effective in history, and how values are effective in history, right? It's not that value is something in the sky and you have the interests in the empirical world. There is also this kind of interconnection. So we have at the start a sort of note by Julia Vieira. Can you read it? I'll read it for everyone. First of all, Julia says thanks to both the speaker and the commentator, and the idea is whether the core of the question is whether there can be a connection of what we heard today with the discussion of Weimar Lübbe regarding Legitimitätskraft und Legalität, so legitimacy, power, let's say, and legality. And this is, so perhaps there is this distinction between legitimacy and legitimization, or legitimacy and the legality of something, and it's addressed to both Andrea and Professor Anter.
If you want, I can answer very briefly to this question. I think that legality for Weber is associated more with the concept of the legal order, no? The juridic Rechtsordnung. Legality is associated more with the existence of an order that uses physical force, physical violence, no, in order to create effectiveness. So legality probably is associated with validity, Geltung, as effectiveness, but not as value, no? That is the concept of legitimacy. So in the concept of legitimacy, we see this relationship between validity and value. In the concept of legality, I think that we can see, we cannot see that.
Yes, Professor Anter, would you have something to add on this respect?
Yes, it's a pity that she already left us. I think she has left us.
Yes.
But she posed a very interesting question, which Weimar Lübbe, in her brilliant book on legitimacy and legality, has posed. She refers to Hans Kelsen first of all, but also to Schmidt, and there is an old dispute in Weberian theory on Weber's on the dignity of Weber's theory of legitimacy and legality, And I think Weimar has a good point in stating that Weber's theory is very convincing. He has often been accused that legality is only a very weak form of legitimacy. This was a critique of Carl Schmitt in Weimar, and today we must confess that Weber was very right, and we have had a pandemic situation in the last years, and this pandemic, as I speak of the COVID pandemic, was ruled by law, and we forgot most of these rules and all of this. And it's good that we left it behind us, but Weber theory that that the legality is a very strong form of legitimacy was proved to be right in these 2 years, and there's written much about it, and I think Weimar Löbe has seen it very clearly in his book, that the legality is a very strong form of legitimacy, and she defended Weber against all the critics, and I think today it is much less problematic to say that she was right. It's a pity that she left the Weberian scene. I speak of Weimar Löbe. She is concerned with medicine, ethics, and so on, and she hasn't published anything about Weber since then, which is I think it is sad. She never returned to this book. That's what I can say to this question about this argument of Weimar Löbe. But I would be interested in one thing. It's a question, a personal question to you, Andrea. How do you come across this topic of order? Was it in sociology or in philosophy, and was it? Did you come across it in Weberian studies, or did you come across it anywhere else?
Can I ask a follow-up question just before you answer, Andrea? Because I also wanted to ask you to tell us about the thesis in which this is the first chapter you said of a thesis. Can you also tell us a bit more about that?
Okay, allora my study frame is political philosophy, and I came from the study of Hobbesian theory, so Hobbesian political philosophy, and I am interested in Weber's concept of Ordnung from the point of view of institutional theory. So I came into this theme from this perspective: political philosophy, institutional theory. Yes, the presentation concerns the third paragraph of the first chapter of my PhD thesis, and the first chapter is about the aim of this first chapter is to define in a formal way what for Weber the order is. It is a complex problem because, as we have already said, order means a lot of things for Weber. And then in the second chapter, I try to study how Ordnung change so the evolution of an order, studying the concept of Sublimierung, sublimation in Weber. And so this is, in general terms, my work.
Okay, that's very interesting to see how Weber is being used through very different perspectives in order to produce results across various disciplines. Perhaps I think we all learned a lot, and we have a lot of food for thought to absorb, but I would like to ask whether there is a last question towards Andrea before reaching to a conclusion and an end for our discussion. Is there anyone who hasn't spoken yet and would like to say something? No? Yes. So I would like to thank everyone very much for attending this marvelous event. And of course, most of all, Andrea Salvatore Cerfeda, thank you very much for your speech, and good luck with the rest of your PhD thesis that we expect to read it with very much interest. And thanks to Professor Andreas Anter for providing such a thorough comment on what Andrea Cerfeda said. Victor, perhaps you would like to make a quick announcement for the next event, or?
Yeah, I'll also thank the speakers, Andrea Cerfeda and Professor Andreas Anter. We all learned a lot and have a lot of food for thought. But also thank you, Yannis, for hosting this, and for everyone who participated. I feel it fits very well with this in terms of, is it a legitimate intervention within this order, the Weber Scholars Network? Yes, because what you did, Andrea, was to try and read things that we have apparently we know very well afresh. That's the one thing. We have here a collaboration between an early career scholar and a more experienced senior Weber expert. This was definitely an international occasion. We had about 9 nationalities based in about 10 different countries. For 15 participants, that's not bad. Also very interdisciplinary. So that's what, these are some of the principles, I guess, all of them very much fulfilled by your presentation. For those curious for the next one, well, first of all, Weimar Lübbe, I think we should definitely try and convince her to participate in the network and maybe participate in one of our activities. It's a great suggestion. The next event will be on May 3rd. That's a Wednesday, exceptionally. And it will be on May 3rd at 2 p.m. on the relationship between Max Weber and Walter Benjamin. The paper will be given by Lucia Pinto, who's a researcher at the University of Buenos Aires. And the commentator will be Professor Chunje Zhang from UC Davis, a professor for German studies at UC Davis. And the time is a little unusual because we'll have a speaker in Buenos Aires and a discussant in Beijing, with a moderator, who I think in that case me, in Western Europe. So that's the time that we find that fits all three. But we'll send you all the info. If you're not on the network or you would like to invite someone, just go to weberscholars.net. And we'll send you all the info on this next meeting very soon. After that, we'll have something on Weber and the stock exchange, also with Sam Webster. And other things are in the works. If you would also like to propose something, just let us know. Thanks, everyone. Thanks also to Brenda and to Edith, who helped organize this. And I'll see you next time.